House Assassinations Committee has just recessed the morning session of its third day of public hearings on the assassination of John F. Kennedy in Dallas in 1963. This morning's testimony was largely of a technical nature, dealing with the field of ballistics and attempting to determine various facts about the bullet, about the trajectory it traveled, whether or not it is arguably true that a single bullet had delivered the initial non-fatal wounds to President Kennedy and then could have gone on to injure Governor Connally of Texas as well, all with one bullet, as the Warren Commission finally concluded. The witness for most of the morning was a man named Larry Sturtevant, who works for the United States Army at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in northern Maryland, and ordinarily does tests on the vulnerability of people and objects to weapons. Among the various things that Mr. Sturtevant said this morning was that he thought the irregular hole in the back of Governor Connally, the irregular size of the hole, gave support to the single bullet theory. He suggested that the movement of President Kennedy's skull to the rear, even if he was shot from the rear, could be explained by a neuromuscular reaction. And he also seemed to indicate that there's no evidence for a second person firing from the grassy knoll in front of President Kennedy. With us today, and to discuss briefly the testimony this morning, is David Lifton, a critic of the Warren Commission, and Jacob Cohen from Brandeis University. Gentlemen, very quickly, how do you evaluate Mr. Sturtevant's testimony? David?
I don't agree with Sturtevant's testimony. The main point against his neuromuscular reaction argument is that you need intact pathways going from the brain. And there was no real effort made this morning to see whether the brain damage reported at Parkland Hospital or in the autopsy report is consistent with the mechanism he's postulating to explain the motion. Decerebrate rigidity takes many minutes to develop. He said, I think it's decerebrate rigidity. Based on some library research I recently did for the book I'm writing, he's wrong. Decerebrate rigidity takes minutes to develop. It cannot come in a hundredth or a
Jerry, did you find the testimony convincing this morning?
Well, I found it not only convincing, I found it old-fashioned. All of the points made have been made again and again in the literature over the years. I just want to pick up a theme which you mentioned, this magical word, the grassy knoll, which has some of the mystique of the Casbah in American letters. It seems to me that there has really been a quietus placed on the grassy knoll and all speculation of at least hits from the grassy knoll. Whether shots were fired which missed, which we will never know about, from assassins we will never see, using bullets which were never recovered, that we will never know. But if anything has been powerfully demonstrated, it is that all the speculation about head snap and the famous Zapruder film 312, 313, 314 is in conjunction with the autopsy materials is totally unfounded, and it's really a support.
We'll get into more of this discussion this afternoon. Incidentally, earlier this morning we may have suggested that Lee Harvey Oswald was definitely the assassin of President John F. Kennedy. He, of course, has never been convicted of that crime, was the alleged assassin, in the words of the Warren Commission and others who have studied the matter. With David Lifton and Jacob Cohen, I'm Sanford Unger in Washington. This PBS live coverage of the hearings until
9 a.m. tomorrow morning.
That concludes a very long indeed, second day of testimony in these public hearings on the Kennedy assassination. To sum up the afternoon briefly, we had testimony from Dr. Cyril Wecht, who was the coroner of Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, which is Pittsburgh, and he gave testimony that refuted, or at least contested, the testimony of 8 other forensic pathologists who tended to support the Warren Commission's theory that the same bullet injured President Kennedy, the initial non-fatal injuries to President Kennedy and the injuries to Governor Connally of Texas in that motorcade in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. This afternoon, Dr. Wecht said that he thought the Warren Commission and the generally establishment view of the assassination was asking us to accept an unfathomable, indefensible, and an incredible trajectory for this one particular bullet. He says that he believes at least 3 shots hit the people and that probably 4 or 5 shots were fired. We're here with Jeremiah O'Leary from the Washington Star, David Lifton, a private critic of the Warren Commission. Jerry, did Dr. Wecht's testimony hold up at the end of the afternoon?
Dr. Wecht's statements pretty thoroughly seem to demolish the one-bullet theory. But then he injected an additional bullet so that we're now left with, he leaves us with 4 bullets fired, 3 of which he believes struck the President and Governor Connolly. And Chairman Stokes asked him one question. He said, what is the average American to believe? And
The 8 people or the 1 person?
No, the average American.
Right.
What is the average American to believe? And Dr. Wecht answered the chairman's question by saying, it's in your hands.
David, what did you think about all this questioning about Dr. Wecht this afternoon?
Well, it's reminiscent of the charge made against the Warren Commission, as if their investigation was conducted to answer Mark Lane. Much of the time here has been spent setting up Dr. Wecht, arguing with him, as if the issue was Dr. Wecht's opinions, and not what happened on November 22nd.
Well, how could they have spent the time better this afternoon?
Well, for example, I would like to see them ask Dr. Humes.
Dr. James Humes, he conducted the original autopsy at Bethesda Naval Hospital.
Who ordered him not to dissect the organs of the neck. That was testified to by his co-autopsy surgeon, Dr. Fink, at the Shaw trial. Issues like that were not handled. The Boswell diagram was not touched. Diagram of the head wounds, which is inconsistent.
Well, in other words, David, we're running out of time.
That's
you
right.
agree that there are still many questions left to be asked and that this committee has not really gotten to. And I think there's still going to be 18 days of public hearings, so they'll be getting to some of those presumably. With Jeremiah O'Leary and David Lifton, I'm Sanford Unger in Washington. This live PBS coverage of the hearings on the assassination of President Kennedy will resume on many of these stations tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. Good night.
Program was provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the Ford Foundation.